Hello guys, and welcome back to the second part of the tutorial. In the last episode we saw how to set up our server.js file, how to manage buffer and data streams, and how to set up a basic environment on which we can build our application. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out before continuing with this episode. You can find the link in the description below. So, in this episode we will create together the core feature of our blog application. As we said in the last episode, we want to perform CRUD operation, so let's go to build the create feature. Many tutorials out there start to develop from the backend. I think that if you don't have clear in mind the entire data flow, this kind of approach could be confusing. Because of that, we will start to build the backend feature only after the user interface. So we are to create the HTML template that will contain the form through which our users will be able to create the blog post. Before we start to create all the HTML markup, let's take a look at what data we must pass from the client to our server. We want that our users will be able to upload an image, insert the post title, the post content, insert 3 post hashtags and the reading time of the post. Our goal is to pass those data and store them inside our database folder as a JSON object. So let's create an HTML file that we can call postcreate.html. Here in our templates folder, so postcreate.html, okay, and now we can create our HTML markup. Here, as you can see, we have a section with class postcreate, we have an h1, we have a form with ID postcreate form, we have the image preview container, we have also the image, we have the input for uploading the image, we have an input for the title, we have an input for the post content, we have 3 input for the hashtag, we have an input for the reading minutes, and we have a submit button for send all this data. At the moment we are not able to see our layout because we ain't created the route yet. So let's go into our server.js file here, and we have to create a new route. Create. As usual, creating a route is a 2-step process, so we have to create an handlers function that will handle that route. handlers.postCreate here. Let's save our server.js file. Let's go in our handlers.js file and we have to create this function. So handlers.postCreate is equal to an async function. Here we want to pass the data. Here we want to achieve the same goal as in the index handler, so we can copy this function here and we can paste it here. We only have to change the post name template, so post create. Okay. If we save our handlers.js file and we reload our server, as you can see here, node index.js, and we go on the create routes. As you can see here, we have our HTML template, but as you can see, our UI is a little bit messy. Since this is not a front-end tutorial, I will go straight, but if you are interested in front-end stuff, I have an entire video where you can learn what is Sass and how you can use it. I have just prepared some CSS rules to speed up the process. I can take this rule and paste it inside our app.css file. If we reload our application, as you can see here, we have a better user experience. These style rules don't have any impact on our blog application feature and are only to make our UI a little bit decent, so feel free to explore them in a second moment. Now, before we continue, we have to improve our server logic, because, for example, if we perform a post request on our home page, guess what will happen? Our server will crash because in our index handler we didn't tell our server what to do if the HTTP request method is different from GET, and as well if there are not string data in our template. To make you understand better, we can do a quick example. To quickly perform a post request on our base URL and make our server crash, we can use the VS Code Thunder Client extension. This extension allows us to make an HTTP request and define the request parameters. If we open the Thunder Client extension and we make a post request to our base URL, we can see that our server will crash. Here we can say HTTP localhost on port 3000, and we can perform a post request, and as you can see here, connection was forcibly closed by a peer. And if we go on our terminal, here, as you can see, our server is crashed because of our data stream variable. In short, when we do not return an object response through our handlers function, our data stream variables become undefined, and because of that our server crashes. So to solve the issue, we have to do two things. The first thing that we have to do to solve this issue is to go on our server.js file and set a condition here on our data stream variable that checks if our data stream variable is different from undefined. If data stream is different from undefined, we can perform these lines of code. Otherwise, we can pass on our main server function a 500 status code and an empty payload. Now, if we load our server, so cls node index.js, and we perform another post request on our base URL here, as you can see, our server is still running and give back to us an empty object with 500 status code. We can also handle all the if statement inside our handlers.js file. So here we can say as, we can return an object with status code 500, and we can return a payload object with an error, and we can say here only get method are allowed. Okay, and we can do the same things here, and we can say error reading the file. Same things here, and we can say error merging the files. Okay, and we can make these improvements also in our post create function. So here, from here. Okay, now we can save our handlers.js file. So now that we have made our code more secure, we can start to work on our client-side JavaScript to build the data object we have to send to our server. So let's open our app.js file here. Okay, as usual, we can start to create the file container in order to export it as a module. So let app is equal to an empty object. We can do here export, and we want to export app. Because of that, we have to add also the attribute type equal to module to our script tag in the head section of our header file. So here we have to add an attribute type equal to module. Okay, so here we can save our app.js file, and we can start to build our interface to make our client send data to our server. So we want to call this function app.client.request is equal to an async function, and here we want to pass the headers, we want to pass the path, we want to pass the method, we want to pass the query string object, and we want to pass the payload. Okay, because we are dealing with promises, we have to use a try catch blocks. So try catch key console.error e. Okay. And as usual, we have to perform all the variable checks with the ternary operator. So, as you can see here, we are checking every time the same thing. So we want that our headers are equal to an object, that are different from null, that our path is equal to a string, that our method is equal to a string, and that is also contained in this array. We want that our query string object is equal to an object and is different from null, and our payload is equal to an object and is different from null. Now we have to build the request URL, and we can achieve this goal very quickly by using the URL API that allows us to transform a JSON object into a query string. So we can say here build the request URL. Here we can say let request URL is equal to our path more a question mark, because of the nature of all query strings. After that, we have to create a SearchParams variable. So let SearchParams is equal to a new. We can use now the URL SearchParams API. Here we have to pass our query string object, so query string object, and we want to transform this object into a string by using the toString method. After that, we only have to append our SearchParams variable to our request URL. So request URL plus equal SearchParams. At this point, we have to build the request header, and also this task is quite easy by using the header API. Here, we are only assigning the key and the value of our header object to the request headers by using the set method. And last but not least, we have to stringify our payload in order to make it able to pass from our client to our server. So here we have to create a new variable named payload string. So let payload string is equal to a JSON.stringify. And here we want to pass our payload. Okay. The last things that we have to do is to pass those data from our client to our server using the fetch API. The fetch API is a new JavaScript API that allows us to send data from the client to our server. It's basically the evolution of the XHR method, aka XML HTTP request method. Now here we have to make a distinction between the GET request and all the other request methods because of the body parameters we have to pass inside the fetch API. If the request method is equal to GET, the fetch API does not accept any body parameters. So here we can start to make an if statement. So if method is different from GET, we can start to grab the response from our server using the fetch API. So let response is equal to wait fetch. Here we want to pass our request URL and also an object with all the parameters. So here we want to pass a method that is equal to our method. We want to pass the headers that are equal to our headers variable, and we want to pass a body that is equal to our payload string. Okay. Now we only have to grab the data from our response. So let data is equal to await response, and we want that data in a JSON format, so JSON. Okay. And the last things that we have to do is to return those data. So return data. If the request method is GET, we want to perform the same things, but we don't want to pass any body parameters. In order to make you understand better what we are doing here, let's try to do a quick example where we exchange data from client to server and from server to client. Before we start our example, we have to create an empty object named app.client in order to use our client request function. So here we have to say app.client is equal to an empty object. Now let's save our app.js file. And we have to correct a little typo that I didn't notice in the last episode. Here in our payload variable in our data object, we have only to switch this parenthesis from here to here. First of all, we have to create a new route and a new handler function. So let's go in our server.js file. Here we can say example and we can say handlers.example. Okay, now we have to go in our handlers.js file and here we have to create a new handler. Let's say handlers.example is equal to an async function and we want to pass the data, okay, from here. Now here we only have to grab our payload data and console log it inside our terminal. So we can say, for example, console.log data.payload, okay, here, and for example we can return an object with status code of 200 and a payload, let's say a message, success, you are in the example handler, okay, and let's save our handlers.js file. Now we can go in our app.js file. Here let's say payload is equal to an object. I want to insert, for example, a name and the name is Fu coding, okay, this is our payload. Now we can do the request, so let server response is equal to await, and we can say app.client.request, and here we want to pass the headers, but we don't have headers to pass, so we can say undefined. We can pass the path, that is our route that we created before, so example. We can pass the method will be post. We can pass a query string object, but we don't have anyone, so we can say undefined. And we can pass here our payload, okay. Now we can say console log server response, okay. So if we try to open a new terminal and we try to run our server, so let's say node index.js, and we refresh the page, as you can see here, we have in our server the object we have passed here, and if we go in our console, here, we can see that we have an object that is success, you are in the example handler. So this is the interface that we can use to exchange data from our server to our client. Now that we understand how we can exchange data from client to server, we can start to build the post object that we have to store in our database folder. First of all, we can get rid of this. Okay, so let's start to create the function that will do that for us. First of all, we have to grab the form using the query selector method. So here we can say app.postCreate is equal to an asynchronous function here, and So here, first of all, we have to grab the form using the query selector method. So let post create form is equal to document dot query selector is, we have to pass the post id, so here post create form. Okay, now we have to bind the form to a submit event, so post create form add event listener, we want to bind with a submit event, and we want to pass an async function. Inside this function we want to pass an event parameter because we want to use the preventDefault method. So if you are unfamiliar with the preventDefault method, in short, this method allows us to prevent the form default behavior. So for example, when a user clicks on the submit button, the form does not redirect the users to another URL or reload the page. So we can use this method, so event.preventDefault. After that, we can continue to build our function using the FormData API. This API allows us to grab the user's inputs very quickly, so we can say here let FormData string is equal to new FormData. Inside this FormData class, we want also to pass an event parameter linked with the target property. In short, this interface allows us to grab the data of the element on top of which we call an event. So here we can say e.target. Let's correct this. Now we can start to gather all the inputs data from the form by using the FormDataGet method and by passing the HTML name attribute. So, for example, let title is equal to FormDataString.get, and we want to pass here title, and we can continue like this with all the form input. Now we can start to build all the pieces of our post object. First of all, we want to store all the tags input inside an array. So here we can say let tag object is equal to an empty array, and we can say tag object dot push, and we want to push our tag 1, transform it to local lowercase, and we can perform the same task for all the 3 tags. So here we can say the same things, and we only have to change the variable name. Now we have to grab the file name from the post image variable, and we have to take the file extension from it. So dot file name and file extension is equal to file name dot substring, and here we want to pass file name dot index of +1 and file name dot length. Okay, or file name. Okay, here basically we are saying that the file extension is a substring of our file name. In short, this method extracts the characters between 2 indices from a string and returns the substring. As you can see here, we have the start index and we have here the end index. Okay, we want to be sure that the file that the users will upload will be an image, so we have to check the file extension of the uploaded file. To achieve this goal, we only have to create an array with all the acceptable extension and check if the file extension is in that array. So we can say here, let acceptable extensions are equal to PNG, JPG, and JPEG. Okay. Now we want to check if our file extension is contained in our acceptable extension array. So acceptable extension, index of file extensions is greater than -1. If this condition is true, we can continue with our function, but if this condition is not true, we want to console log out an error, and we can say here file format acceptable var, and here we want to pass our acceptable extension array. Okay, as we said in the last episode, we set up our string decoder to decode from the base64 encoding type to the UTF-8. So now we have to encode our image content in that format. To achieve this goal, we have to use the FileReader API. So here we can say let FileReader is equal to a new FileReader. Okay, and we have to use the read as data URL method and passing our post image variable. So here we can say FileReader dot read as data URL, and here we want to pass our post image file. To grab the file content, we have to bind the file reader to a load event. So FileReader.add event listener. Here I have to bind with a load event. We want an async function here, and we want to pass an event here. Okay. After that, we only have to point at the image content by using the event interface, the target property, and the result property. So here we can say let file content is equal to an event target.result. Okay. In order to make you understand better the next steps, we have to console log out an image file content. So here we can say console log, and here we can pass our file content. So letting it our app container first of all. So here we can say app.init is equal to a function. We want that our post create function will be triggered only when we are on our create template, so we can check this very quickly using an if condition. So if window.location.pathName is equal to create, we want to pass our app.postCreate here. Okay, and last things, we have to init our function, so app.init. So let's save our app.js file. Let's try to go on our create route. So create, let's open our console here. Now we can try to upload an image like the Node.js logo, and we have to go in our console. Now if we click on the publish button as you can see, we have an error. Okay, let's see what's happening here. Okay, this is the error because we don't want the file name but the name. Okay, let's save our app.js file, reload our route. Okay, we try to upload another image, the Node.js logo, and as you can see here, we have the content of our image in a base64 encoding type. And as you can see here, this first line here before the comma is the image header. In order to make our server understand this image and in order to make us to open this image and to store correctly on our server, we have to cut out these headers. So with the next lines of code, we will try to achieve this goal. Here, first of all, we want to make a distinction from JPEG, JPG and PNG. So first of all, we have to check if the file extension is equal to JPEG or JPG. So if file extensions is equal to JPEG or file extension is equal to JPG. Okay, if this condition, if one of these conditions is true, we want to cut out the headers using the replace method. So let clean file content is equal to file content dot replace, and here we want to pass the string we want to strip out. So data image JPEG base 64, and we want to replace it with empty strings. Okay, and now we can start to build for this section of the code our post object. So here we can say let post create object is equal to a title, and here we want to pass our title, a tag. Okay, and here we want to pass our tag object array, reading minutes. So here we want to pass reading minutes, and here we have to use the parse int method in order to make our strings as a number. So reading minutes base 10. Here we want to pass the main content. So main content, the file name, the file extension. Okay, file extension, and we want to pass the file content, which is our clean file content. Okay, now the last thing that we have to do is to send this object to our server using our client request function. So let response object is equal to await app.client.request. Okay, here we don't have any header, so we can pass undefined. Here we can pass the path, will be post. Here we can pass the method, will be post. Here we can pass the query string object, but since we don't have anyone, we can pass undefined. And here we can pass our post create object. Okay? If there is a response object, we can redirect the users to our home page. Okay, Now let's handle the last part of this function, because we want to achieve the same things we have achieved before with the PNG extension. So here we can simply write an else statement, and inside of this else statement we can do the same things here, but we have to change here with this with PNG. Now we can try to grab those data from our server. Let's go into our server.js file. Let's create the new, okay, let's get rid of this. Let's create a new route, so posts, and this will be handlers dot blog post. Okay, let's go in our handlers.js file and let's get rid of this. Okay, before we move on to build the behavior for the post method, we have to build a function that checks for the client request method, and based on the specific method routes the request to a specific handler. So here we can say, here basically we are routing the request to the corresponding handler included in our underscore blog post object. Okay, this object doesn't exist yet, so let's create it. So here we can say handlers dot underscore blog post is equal to an empty object. Okay, and now we are ready to create the post logic for this route. So first of all, as usual, we have to create our functions. So handlers dot blog post dot post is equal to an async function. Okay, here we want to pass our data. Okay, now as usual we can wrap our function inside a try catch block. So try catch e console.error e. Okay, and here we can start to build our behavior. So first of all, we have to check all the variables we want to pass inside this route. So after that we have checked all our inputs, we can start to build an if condition that check if in our inputs there are the title, the tags, and the reading minutes. So if there are title and tag and the reading minutes, okay, we can continue. Otherwise we want to give back an error, and we can say here a status code of 400, and we want to give back a payload, and in this payload we want to give back an error, and here we can say missing inputs. Okay, now that we have checked that we have the title, the tag, and the reading minutes, we can go ahead to create our behavior. First of all, we have to know that when it comes to manage data on our database, we have to use ID. So let's build a function that do that for us. So let post ID is equal to helpers create random string, and here we want to pass the string length. So let's go in our helpers.js file to build this function. Okay, but I think that we are already in our helpers.js file, so we have to grab all these things and paste it inside our handlers.js file. So here, okay, now we can save our handlers.js file and we can return on our helpers.js file, and here we can start to build our function. Helpers dot create random string is equal to a function, and Here we want to pass our string length. Okay. Now we can go ahead. Okay, here basically we are saying that we have all these possible characters. We initialize our empty string, and through a for loop and the random math method, we are loop inside all these possible characters to build our random string. And the length is the number of time that we want to loop inside our possible character string. Okay, here we return the string. If this is not a number, we return false. So let's go in our handlers.js file, and here we can use this function. Now we want to check if there is the file name, because we want to be sure that our user has uploaded an image. Oops, here we have an error. So file, and file, this is correct. Okay, so if there is the file name, here we can continue. Otherwise, we want to return this object. Okay, so we can continue. Here we want to create our image file name, so let image file name, oops, is equal to a helpers create random string, and we want to pass the number 10. So another feature that we want to build is that when a users will delete a post, we want that all the related image to that post will be deleted. First of all, we have to initialize two empty array. Let all post images name is equal to an empty object, and let all post images extensions is equal to an empty object. Okay, now we want that our file extension and our file name will be pushed inside these arrays. So all post image name dot push file name, and all post image extension dot push our file extension. Okay, now we can start to save our image data on our server. So we have to use a function that does not exist yet, so we have to build it together in a moment. Let image data is equal to await data dot create image. We want to pass here the folder, we want to pass the image file name and also the extension. So here dot plus image file extension. Okay, here we want to pass the file content, and we want to pass the encoding will be base 64. Okay, through this function we are able to save our image data on our server. We will save all the uploaded image inside the upload folder, which does not exist yet, so let's create it together. So inside our image folder we want to create another folder that we can name upload. Okay, as you can see here, we have an object that does not exist yet. In this object we will store all the methods that we want to use to manipulate the data on our server. So let's create another file in our server folder. So here we can say data.js. Okay, so here first of all we have to import all the dependency we want to use. So here we can say dependencies. We want to use the fs promises module, so fs promises is equal to require fs promises. We want to use the path module, so let path is equal to require our path. Okay, and we want to use our helpers module, so require dot helpers. Okay, now we want to create the container for this module, so let lib is equal to an empty object. Okay, and we want to export this module like an object, so module dot exports is equal to lib. Okay, and here we can start to build our function, so we can say here lib dot create image is equal to an async function, and here we want to pass our directory, we want to pass our file name, we want to pass our data file and our encoding type. Okay, as usual we have to use a try catch block, so here try catch key console.error e. Okay, and we can say let file data are equal to await fs promises dot write file. Okay, and we want to pass lib dot base dir image plus our directory plus / plus our file name plus the content data plus the encoding flag. Okay, this does not exist yet, so let's create it together. So here we can say lib dot base dir image, we want to use our path dot join method to build the path we want to point to save our uploaded image. So here we can say slash dot dot public and images. This notation exists because we want to jump out our server folder and we want to jump in our public folder. Okay, so here we are doing nothing else to build the path we want to use to save our image data on our server. After that, the only things that we have to do is to close our data, so await file data question mark dot close. Okay, now that we have our create image function, we can save our data.js file, we can go in our handlers.js file and we can import our new module. So const data is equal to require data. Okay, now let's save our handlers.js file, let's go in our function, and as you can see here, now we are able to grab our image data and to save on our server through this function that we have just created. So we can continue to build the create behavior. So after that, we want to check if our image data exists, so if image data. Okay, otherwise we want to give back an error, and we can say the same things we have said before here. We can copy this and we can paste it inside hit. Oops. Okay, we can continue. So here we can start to build our post object. So let post object is equal to an empty object, and here we can say id post id, so title, and this is our title to local lowercase because we want to normalize this data. Okay, we can pass our tag, so here there is our tag array, our reading minutes, so reading minutes are equal to reading minutes, our file name that is equal to our file name, our file extension that is equal to our file extension, our main content that is equal to our main content variable, and here we want to import all the true arrays, so all post images name are equal to all post images name, and all post images extension are equal to all post image extension. Okay, this is our post object. Now we can proceed to save this object on our server through a function that we create in our data.js file. So here we can say let post object data await data.create, okay, and here we want to pass our post folder, our post id, because we want that our post file name will be our id, and our post object as the data we want to save. So let's build this function. First of all, we have to create a post folder inside our database. So here we can say post, okay. Let's save our handlers.js file. Let's go in our data.js file. Let's build another path for our post data. So here we can say lib.basedir is equal to path.join. Here we want to pass the dir name and our db folder. So here we can say /database/. This is our base directory. Now we can build our create function. So here we can say lib.create is equal to an async function, and here we want to pass the directory where we want to store our data, the file name, and the data we want to store. Here, as usual, we have to wrap all this function inside a try catch block. So here console.error. Okay, so let's create our new file using the open method. So fs.promises.open, and here, as usual, we want to pass our lib.basedir object plus the directory name that we gather from the other function, plus the / plus our file name, plus the extension we want to use for our file that will be JSON, and plus the wx flag that allows us to open and write inside a file. So here now we can say await. So here, before we continue, we have to add the await keyword. So here we have to write await file data. We want to use the truncate method. Okay, now if there is our file data, we can continue to build our string data using the json.stringify method, and here we want to pass the data that we gather from our client, and we want to write the file, the data on the file using the write file method. So here we can pass our file data and our string data. Now we have only to close the file, so file data (close), and we have to return true. Okay, let's save our data.js file. Let's go in our handlers.js file, and as you can see here, we are only saving our data object inside our posts folder, and we are giving to it a name of our post id, of our id. So the file name will be abcd123.json, okay, a random id. So now that we have our post object data, we can return the server response. So if post object data, okay, we can return an object, and here we can say status code 200. We can return a payload, which will be a message, which will be a message of success, and here we can say post created. Okay, now let's save our handlers.js file. Let's try to test out our new feature. So let's go in our terminal. So node index.js. Here we have to type localhost. Okay, we have to go in our create function, and here we have to upload an image, write some random text and some random number. As you can see here, we have received the file, but we have no file in our post, so we have to check what's going on here. Okay, let's try to see what's happened. Okay, here as you can see there is a little error. Okay, we have to, okay, let's save our file. Let's restart our server. So node index.js. Here we can try to upload another image, insert some random title. So here we can insert some random number. Okay, if we go on publish, as you can see here, we have the uploaded image, but as you can see, our create random string does not work properly because we have only a and we don't have our post object, so we have to check what's going on. So first of all, we have to go in our create random string for the image file name. So here we have to go in our helpers.js file. Let's see this create random string here. Okay, so here we have to pass 1. Okay, and here there is another error because it's multiplied for the characters length. Okay, let's save our file. So cls node index.js. Let's try to upload another image. And as you can see here, we have finally a random string, but in our database there are no post objects, so we have to check out what's going on here. Okay, let's go in our handlers.js file and let's try to figure it out. Maybe is this that don't work. Let's take a look what we have inside our console. Missing inputs. Where? Image data. Okay, we have to go in our data. Yes, because our image data does not return nothing. So here we have to correct this. So here we have to return true. Okay, so let's try to restart our server. So node index.js. Let's try to upload an image. Let's try to upload a title, some random hashtag and reading number. And if we hit the publish button, as you can see here, we have our image with a random ID, and we have a random ID for our object. As you can see, as a JSON extension, here we have the same ID, the title, we have the hashtag here, we have the reading minutes, the file name, and as you can see here, this is wrong because we don't want that, we want a random string. So let's go in our handlers.js file and let's see what happened here, because our file name is file name, but it's wrong because this has to be our image file name. Okay, let's try to restart our server. Let's try to upload another image. As you can see here, we can write some stuff. Let's go to publish. Okay, here is it, our image, and as you can see, if we go here, our file name is a random string, and this is also an error because we don't want these things, because we want only the file name. Okay, so we have to go in our handlers.js file, and here we don't have to push the file name, but we have to push the image file name. Okay, so let's go in our terminal, restart our server. Let's upload another image here. Let's try to write some random text, and if we go on the new file, as you can see here, we have the post image file name here, and we have the post image file name here, and perfect. That's all. Now we are able to send data from our client to our server and store that data inside our database. We can get rid of all this data. And now we can start to build the read feature. And that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and if you found this content somehow useful, please consider subscribing to my channel and leaving a like to support more content like this. Coming soon, part 3 of the tutorial. See you in the next one, guys.